One of the reasons normal people are so shocked by significant doses of truth is because they have been so blinded to how things really are that their perspectives on the current situation are not well informed. I'm trying to be nice, can you tell? When you don't correctly understand the negative consequences of things, then you don't really see them as problems, you see them as small problems. If someone came along and said, oh, your nails haven't been clipped in a while, how about I remove your kidney? You're like, what? How's that? You're crazy. Well, what if they were connected in some way and you just didn't know? What if the only way to actually clip your nails would be to take out your kidney? Now that's obviously just a crazy example, but it turns out that there are many things that are more connected than normal people realize. And if you're dealing with an enormous problem that's extremely well seated and is really hard to see, it turns out that it's highly likely that whatever solution exists to that problem is going to be really intense and unpopular. So I want to share this book that I've been reading. It's called Democracy, the God That Failed. It's got a long, ominous subtitle. And I'm pretty sure that extraordinarily few people would be excited to even get their hands on this book because of the title, which I think was poorly chosen. And then the way it's written would repel even more people. So I can't recommend it, but I have tremendous respect for the author. I don't know anything about him except the ideas he presents here, so maybe I should be more careful with that. Maybe he secretly eats kittens or something. But the ideas that he presents here really impressed me. And the boldness and logic with which he presented them really impressed me. But I think it'd be really hard for most people to digest the way it's written. And whenever I read things like that, it makes me sad because I feel like in another life, if we could have worked together on this, I think I could have helped him say some things more clearly. Which, if you've ever read my stuff, that might shock you to death that I would believe that. Anyway, but the ideas, a lot of the ideas he has in that book are just amazing. And it always floors me when I read something that overlaps with things that I've been taught through Revelation, because I should say directly from the Lord, because I just think it's neat that there are people who've dedicated their lives to certain fields, and I had absolutely no clue that they existed or that these ideas existed. And then I get it's like meeting a cousin you didn't know you had. And, these people would probably be deeply offended to hear me say that, because not many people want to be associated with me in any way. But nevertheless, that's how it feels to me. So, to them, they probably would, man, there's so many bees out today. They would probably feel like they just discovered that they're wanted for some crime in another state or something not so fun. So what do I like about this book? Well, he takes on a sacred cow, which is democracy. And if you've watched my videos, you already know how I feel about it. I completely agree with that Indian guru guy who said, democracy is for the people, of the people, by the people. But the people are retarded. And that's the problem. That's the problem with democracy. But this is a much longer book than just that. So he has more to say about it. Okay, so what's shocking about this is that the arguments he raises about democracy fly in the face of how people perceive it to be. And it turns out that, zooming out from the particulars, the biggest problem with democracy is a system of decay and destruction, which that should shock you if you were raised in going to public school in the United States. It turns out that there are all these really, really straightforward arguments that you can make that show that any democratic system will absolutely, positively lead to collapse. Imagine that. And it just so happens that all of history proves that to be, I should say, sorry, let me be more careful, supports that hypothesis. Here's what's scary about this book. This book was written in 2001. And one reason I really like this idea that I'm sharing with you is that this happens all the time. I've said this before. We think of the end times as this new revelation of all this new truth. I'm here to tell you that a bunch of that truth is already here. It's just needles in a haystack. And it turns out that it's really, really rare and difficult for people to pluck these things out and to understand them and to understand what their real value is. And this is a case in point. I don't know anybody who would want to read this book besides me and maybe one other guy I know. That guy happens to understand and have a flair for big words, and he's really stubborn in a good way, and he'd plow through this no matter how hard it was to read. And he's really into government, and he wouldn't be offended by the guy's boldness and a bunch of the stuff that he says in ways that are not PC at all. So, in fact, reading the book, he's apparently still a professor of economics. It makes me wonder if I should have done that instead of computer science. Maybe I got canceled. Anyway, so what ends up happening is it gets harder and harder to join together the preconditions to make the case for truth that's bigger and bigger. The bigger the truth, the harder it is to persuade people of it. Now, this might fly in the face of what you would assume it was like, right? Well, I don't get it. It should be the bigger the truth, the easier and more obvious it is. No, it's not that way at all. Because we have all these barriers, all these eyes of needles that we have to go through. And it's almost like Odysseus firing that arrow through all the axe heads. I think that's the way it worked, if I remember, in the Odyssey. There's more and more axe heads to fire the arrow through. And more frequently, the arrow will bounce off one of them and not continue its path, get to its destination. In the case of this guy's ideas, I already went, you have to be a stubborn ox with a love for big words, with nothing better to do, who's willing to spend a lot of money on an expensive book by an author you've never heard of, and on and on and on and on, and not be offended by the things he says and all these other things. And being willing, you have to be willing to entertain an idea that flies in the face of everything you've been taught your whole life. How many people can do that, right? It's extraordinarily rare to have that collection of properties as a person today. And then, can you extract this out into your day-to-day life in ways that are practical and applied? It just keeps getting harder the longer that you stare at this, okay? What's my point in this? I have several. I've already mentioned some of them. What are the odds that you're going to be that person? And if you are, what's the importance of you breaking these things down and sharing them with other people? It's vastly important. What's the challenge? How do you take a puzzle that's got 350 pieces and no box to guide you, and you put it together? How do you help other people to do that? You have to help them to want to do that. You have to guide them in how to do that. Well, it's easier for them because you've become the box. You have a puzzle that's put together. Even if you take it apart, you know what it looks like and you can help them. You also help them because you're making it easier to believe it can be done. You've done it before. Unless they think you're a liar, it'll be easier for them just because they have an example of someone who's done it. They know it's possible at least, right? It's a big challenge. You know, humans, we really don't have any kind of weaponry, any kind of equipment to distinguish between things that are very difficult and things that are impossible. In fact, there aren't really words to describe the gradation of difficulty. That's kind of crazy. It's like we make fun of cultures that didn't have a word for the color blue. Well, we don't have words to describe the gradient of difficulty in things. So we can just keep piling reallys before hard, and that's basically all we can do. So how do you know it's impossible? Well, you can't know until you've tried. And you have to try with all of your heart, might, mind, and strength. And you just can't do that on very many things in life. So you have to choose your experiments wisely. And so when someone comes along and they've already done it, the hardest part's done. Because copying something is orders of magnitude easier than discovering it yourself. So, if you figure things out, you have to help other people put together the puzzle, and that's probably going to require you to shrink it down. That's really, really valuable. It's difficult, but it's so much more valuable than the effort requires, than whatever cost the effort requires. There's so many ideas out there that will make your head spin. The good news is that all of them have sufficient reason. The bad news is that basically no one who doesn't already know those things is ready for them. What lies before us is an immense work of helping people get a lot better at rationally evaluating ideas, at applying ideas in their life that have sufficient reason, at valuing things for what they're really worth. The good news is it's not the job of any single person. We just sign up for the war, do our part. The bad news is that it can be hard enough that it'll feel like we're on our own and that it's an insurmountable challenge. But that's just the way it is. And it can be done, and it has to be done.